Welcome everyone to the first video for Project 2, and right up here on the screen I have what the finished product will look like by the time we're done with these series of videos. We're making Lego bricks here, folks, but the thing is, we are not just going to eyeball it and make sure that all of the measurements are correct and all of that. We are actually creating an exact replica of a Lego brick. All of the measurements, all of the sides, everything. So the real point of this project is to get you guys comfortable with measuring and actually being precise about where you're placing different shapes and different materials. So again, this is what the finished product is going to look like. It looks like any ordinary Lego piece that you guys have probably seen before. We can see that it's a 4x2 brick, and everything's placed correctly. It's all symmetrical, etc., etc. So I just wanted to show you guys what it's going to look like. And now I'm going to go ahead and quit out of SketchUp and open up a brand new project. So let me quit here. And I'm going to open SketchUp from the desktop as we usually do. And now, first new piece of material, we are using a different template this time. We are not going to use the landscape architecture like we did in the past. We're going to use a different one. So I'm going to open up the little template menu here. And there's landscape architecture. That's what we used in the past. But actually this time we are going to use 3D printing in millimeters. It should be the last option all the way down at the bottom. It's very important that you pick the correct one, not inches. We're picking millimeters here because all the measurements we're going to be doing with this Lego brick are going to be in millimeters. So once I've selected 3D printing in millimeters, I can start using SketchUp. Really quick, this is at the very bottom. Make sure you're using the scroll bar on the side to scroll all the way down and get to it. 3D printing in millimeters, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so right off the bat, there's something different about this template, obviously. It gives you this big, huge box here, and this is actually meant to show you like what the 3D printer, the area that it's going to print out in. Not totally important that you guys understand that, but the important thing is we're going to delete this. So we're going to first, right off the bat, select the pointer tool, and we're going to click on this MakerBot replicator box. I can see that I have it selected because it highlighted the whole thing in blue after I clicked on it, and we're simply just going to hit delete. So now we have a nice wide open build space to work with. Go ahead and pause the video, get the template open, and delete the MakerBot replicator box. Okay, now that we have a nice clean open build space, we're going to start by building the base of the Lego brick. And you saw previously when I showed you the actual finished product, a Lego brick is essentially a rectangle, a cube, that has a lot of different smaller cylinders on top of it. So we're going to start much the same way that we started with the house, and that is with the rectangle tool. And we're going to draw a rectangle straight down on the ground here. So I'm going to get a bird's eye view. So I'm looking down at my build space. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. And now we're going to start with the rectangle tool. So let's go ahead and select that. And here is the first new piece of material for you guys here. It's very important that you listen closely. As I said before, we're building the actual dimensions of an actual Lego brick. So we have to be very precise. And we're going to tell the computer exactly what the measurements are going to be. So previously, we would just like draw a box, and there's the base of our house. That's kind of how we used the rectangle tool before. We are not going to do it that way this time. So let me edit undo that. The way we're going to do this is we're going to start drawing the rectangle and then put measurements in and then press enter. So watch what I do here. First of all, we are not clicking and dragging. We are not going to do that. Instead, we are going to click once and then just kind of start the rectangle. Now notice, I haven't clicked a second time. I can kind of move the mouse all around where I would like, and if I click a second time, then it creates the rectangle. So keep that in mind. Here's how we do this. We're going to start the rectangle by clicking once. Now that I've clicked, I can move my mouse around a little bit without the rectangle actually being created. And now that the rectangle, like our tool is kind of like willy-nilly right now, we can make the rectangle any size we want. Pay close attention to the bottom right corner of the screen where it says dimensions, right down here. So when I click to create the rectangle and I start moving it around, notice that the dimensions of the rectangle are being recorded and they're changing. So as I move it, it's getting larger and it's getting smaller in the bottom right corner of the dimensions there. So once again, I click and I drag the rectangle just a little bit. Now, here's where we put in our measurements. You can look at the packet for the exact measurements, but we want this rectangle to be exactly 31.8 millimeters by 15.8 millimeters. So after I've clicked and I can kind of move the mouse around all I want without the rectangle being created, I actually just go right to the keyboard and I type in 31.8 mm, comma, 15.8 mm. And you'll see in the bottom right corner in the dimensions, it actually wrote all that in. So it's 31.8 mm for millimeters, comma, 15.8 mm. And you can see it down here in the dimensions. And when I press enter, it created a rectangle for us that was the exact dimensions that we told it to be, which was 31.8 millimeters by 15.8 millimeters. I'm going to do that one more time for you. So again, we take out the rectangle tool, we click, and we just move the mouse just a little bit. Now I just clicked one time. I'm not clicking and dragging. So I've clicked and I'm moving the rectangle around just a little bit, and then I go right to the keyboard and I type in 31.8 mm, comma, 15.8 mm, and then I pressed enter. And that gave us the exact dimensions. So this rectangle is the perfect size, the exact size that we want it to be. Go ahead and pause the video and make your rectangle. Okay, so now that we have the 31.8 millimeter by 15.8 millimeter rectangle, we're going to push-pull this to exactly 9.6 millimeters. This is the exact same process, except we're using the push-pull tool instead. So I'm going to grab the push-pull tool, and I'm going to hover over top of my rectangle until it turns blue. It's got the kind of all those blue little dots in there. And just like with the rectangle tool, I'm not going to click and drag. I'm just going to click one time on the base of the rectangle and just move it a little bit with my mouse without clicking a second time, just so I know that it's ready to be push-pulled. And then just like last time, I'm going to go right to the keyboard and type in 9.6 mm. And notice in the bottom right, the distance or the height is now going to be 9.6 mm, and I'm going to press enter. Bam, there we go. Perfect rectangular prism that is 31.8 millimeters by 15.8 millimeters by 9.6 millimeters high. We're starting off strong. All of our measurements are correct. Pause the video now and go ahead and push-pull your rectangle to exactly 9.6 millimeters high. Okay, so now that you've done that, we have this perfect size rectangle. We are going to now go ahead and start making the cylinders on the top of the Lego brick. Now, here's the thing. We are going to make the cylinders a very specific size, and we're going to use the circle tool for that. But here's what I don't want to do, is I don't want us going in there and making all of these circles and them not being totally even or correct or lined up properly. So if we don't do this next step where we line everything up, your Lego brick is going to start looking like this, where everything's a different size and nothing is lined up properly. So pay very close attention, because before we make the circles, we're going to make guidelines for where the circles are going to go so that it's evenly done across the whole Lego brick. And this is a bit of a strange process, so just bear with me here. We're going to make the grid lines, and to do that, we're going to draw a series of lines across and up and down the top of our box so that we know where the circles are going to go. And every single one of those lines is going to be in the midpoint of the square. Watch this, and then I'll have you pause the video. We're going to take out the line tool, And just like we did with the roof, we're going to drag along the side of the border until we find the midpoint. Again, it'll turn blue and snap and say midpoint. We're going to click and draw a line down the center midpoint. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. We're going to take the pencil tool and we're going to just drag down the side without clicking until it snaps in and says midpoint. And then we're going to draw our line across that midpoint. Now, here's where it gets weird, because we're actually going to draw a bunch more lines, and we don't actually need all of them. Bear with me here. So now in this top spot, we're going to draw a line from this new midpoint here between this line and the edge of the rectangle. So if we drag across, it's going to find the midpoint again, and that's the midpoint between this line and the edge of the box. So we're going to draw that midpoint, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Good. Now we're going to do the same thing on the other side between these two spots. So going from the side now, we're going to drag up, find the midpoint again, and draw another line that goes across this side. And then we're going to do the same thing again on the bottom. We're going to drag from here and find the midpoint between those two lines, and we're going to drag a line across again. Now, we're going to do this one more time and then delete some of the lines. So across the top, we're going to do the midpoint between these two spaces again. So here's the midpoint between this line and the edge. Going to draw that midpoint. Going to draw this midpoint. Going to draw this midpoint. And then finally, this last midpoint here. Okay, that was a lot of midpoints. So go ahead and pause the video now and draw all of those midpoints, and then we're going to go in and start deleting some of these lines out so that we have a good grid line for where our circles are going to go. So pause the video now and draw all those midpoints. Make sure they're all in the exact middle, and you'll know it's the midpoint if it snaps in. Okay, so now that we have all of our midpoint lines done, we don't actually need all of them. Most of these lines were done so that we could find the midpoint of other areas, and I'm going to kind of explain that later. But the next step here is we don't actually need all of these. So we're going to delete some of them so that we have good grid lines for our cylinder. So I'm going to take the eraser tool, and I'm going to get rid of every other line going from left to right. So here we can see that my first line is right here. So I'm going to delete this whole series of lines here with the eraser tool. And then here will be the next line, so we're going to leave that. And then I'm going to delete the next series of lines with the eraser tool. And then here's the next line, we're going to leave that one. And I'm going to delete this next series. So every two going from left to right, you're going to delete those lines. And now we're going to do the same thing from top to bottom, but this time it's easy because we only have to delete the very center line. So I'm going to take the eraser tool and get rid of all of these ones too. And there we go. Now we have nice grid lines for our circles to go. Go ahead and pause the video now and delete every other line going from left to right, and then the middle line going from top to bottom. Okay, so we have our grid lines done. And now it's time to start drawing the circles. The reason we did all these lines here is so that we could use these guidelines as areas to start our circle. And if you look at your packet, all of the circles are going to be exactly 2.6 millimeters in diameter. And the way we're going to draw the circles is the same way that we did the rectangles and the same way that we did the push-pulling earlier. We're going to start with the circle tool. And if you don't see the circle tool, you might have to click this little arrow to the right of the rectangle tool and select circle. Now we're going to take our circle tool and put it in the middle of these first two grid points, kind of at this cross. And now we're going to draw the circles to be exactly 2.6 millimeters in diameter. So I'm going to click once, and I'm just going to move the circle a little bit, just so it's kind of up and moving. And again, I didn't click and drag, I just clicked once. Now I'm going to put in my measurements on the keyboard, 2.6 mm, and press enter. There, now we have a circle that's exactly 2.6 millimeters around our guideline. And I'm going to keep doing that on all of them. So on the second one, I'm going to click once and just drag a little bit, go right to the keyboard and type in 2.6 mm and press enter. And then continue to do that on all of them. So again, I clicked once, went right to the keyboard, 2.6 mm, enter. Same thing here, 2.6 mm, enter. Same thing here, 2.6 mm, 2.6 mm, and then enter. 2.6 mm, and the final one, 2.6 mm. Okay, go ahead and pause the video and make all of your circles at the sort of cross line of the guidelines that we made earlier. Good. We have the rectangle, we have the guidelines, we have all the circles. We're in the home stretch here, folks. Next step is we have to just get rid of all these extra lines in here. We don't actually need any of these anymore. So I'm just going to simply take the eraser tool and go in and just start erasing all of these lines here that we don't need. So all these ones in the middle of the circle, we don't need those anymore. Get rid of all these, all these. Be careful that you don't delete any of the circles though. We want to be really precise and just get rid of the stuff that we don't need. Good. So now we have our circles that no longer have crosses in the middle of them. Go ahead and pause the video and erase all the circles. Or all the insides of the circles, not the circles themselves. Okay, so now that we have this nice clean top with no lines going through the circles, our last step really is just to push-pull each of these to 1.8 millimeters each. And this is the exact same process that we used to do when we started the square and made it into the cube with the push-pull tool after we put our measurements in. This is the exact same thing. So I'm going to grab the push-pull tool and I'm going to hover over my first circle here and I'm going to click once and then just move it a little bit. But again, I did not click and drag. I just clicked once and then kind of moved it a little bit. So now I can go right to the keyboard and type in 1.8 mm and press enter. So now we have this cylinder that came from the initial circle we made and it's push-pulled to exactly 1.8 millimeter. And we're going to do this with all of them. Click once, move it a little bit, 1.8 mm, 1.8 mm, same thing here, 1.8 mm, and again I'm just clicking once and then just moving it a little bit and going right to the keyboard, 1.8 mm, 1.8 mm, 1.8 mm, and 1.8 mm. Brilliant! Go ahead and pause the video and push-pull all of your circles to 1.8 millimeters. Okay, so now that we got that done, let's just double check and make sure that all our measurements are correct. To do that, we're going to grab the measuring tape, which we haven't used yet. And the measuring tape works exactly like a ruler or any other measuring tape. You can pretty much measure any side that you want to digitally to make sure that it's all good. So first I'm going to measure the height of our square to make sure that it is 9.6 millimeters. So if I click from the bottom and drag up, it's going to show me exactly what the measurement is, and we can see that it's 9.6 millimeters exactly. Good. Now let's go from the left side to the right side and make sure that it's 15.8 or 31.8 millimeters. And it is. Good. Let's orbital tool around a little bit here. And let's just check this again. And yep, 15.8 looks good to me. And we're seeing the measurements in the bottom right corner over here where we typed our measurements before. So let's make sure that this is 1.8. It is. Let's make sure these are 2.6 diameter. Yep, so 5.2 total. Yep, 2.6 to the middle. Good. All the measurements are correct. Now we just got to paint it. That's the easy part. So I'm going to pull up my paint bucket here. And I think I'm going to paint this in a nice orange color. Why not, right? So I just go in and I paint every single side, and that's pretty much it. So you guys can pause the video at any time and go in and start painting. Previously, I opened up that project and showed you what it should look like. I'm just going to pull that out one more time so that you guys can see. So this, once again, is the finished product. Everything's measured perfectly. It's all colored. Once you're done with this, the next video we're going to go over how to make the bottom. So the bottom has those 3 circles, so you could technically snap in another Lego piece under the bottom. But for now, this is a great start. We have a perfectly measured Lego piece. Thanks for watching.